Welcome to Comedy Centric, your place for all things comedy. Every week, we'll discuss the legends and the people who built the business, the performers, writers, behind the scenes, and stories that you have never heard. So relax, take a load off, and join us for this episode of Comedy Centric. Now, the host of your show, nationally headlining comedian, a woman with a wicked sense of humor and a killer Jersey accent, Julia Scotti.
Welcome to Comedy Centric. I want to introduce my right-hand person before we do anything. This is Kathy Caldwell, the pride of Stapleton, Missouri. Okay, that's where she's from. We're gonna get. Normally, we talk and we make stupid talk right at the beginning here, but we're not gonna make stupid talk today because we have. I've been driving people crazy for the last 3 weeks with this guest today, and I am. This is for me. This is one of the biggest days of my life. So I am proud. If you're a fan of the Dick Van Dyke Show, if you're a fan of That Girl, if you're a fan of Kate and Natalie, this guy, along with his partner Sam Denoff, wrote. I can't even tell you how many he wrote, but he's got 12 Emmy nominations, won 5 Emmys. Ladies and gentlemen, the living legend, Bill Persky. Thank you, Bill. Yay, there he is.
How do you do? Very nice to see you and glad to be living.
Well, we're glad you're living too. And speaking of living, tomorrow is a very special day for you.
Yes, it is.
Correct?
It's my 91st birthday.
We know that, and because you told me not to get you a present. Oh, I blew it out. Wait.
What are you lighting there?
What? I'm lighting a candle. I am.
Okay.
Well, we have to sing to you. You ready, guys?
Ready?
Happy birthday
to you. Happy birthday
to you. Happy birthday, dear Bill. Happy birthday to you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to blow them out.
Go ahead.
Good. Ready? Blow it out.
There.
Okay.
First you, then you. There you go. The magic of you wanted to meet Shannon. She just brought me a glass of white wine. This is Shannon.
Hi, Shannon. How are you?
Shannon.
Is he giving you trouble?
Shannon,
Oh, always. No, he's awesome.
Can I have a glass of white wine, Shannon?
Sure. It worked with the candle. Why not?
So, look at this book. Okay, look at these notes. I've been my entire life for the last 2 weeks has been about Bill Persky. Starting with Cousin Lester and the Roto Broiler.
Oh God, you got that. Oh, I forgot that was in there. Yeah, that was my first job in advertising, and my cousin Lester had this small advertising agency, and his main client was. This was back in 1954, and his main client was Roto-Broil 400, which was the original broiler that now everybody has. And it was a lot of people living in apartments, and it did everything. It roast, toast, broils, boils, bakes, and fries, all at the same time, whether you wanted to or not, because there was one heat source. So you would. There's a couple stories about Roto-Broil that I don't think are in there. Anyway, I was the associate producer, which meant I was earning $30 a week and did everything but bring lunch and make lunch. But for the commercials, I would buy the food to illustrate. And on the top of it, you'd have a Pyrex dish boiling something. Then you'd have a turkey or a little chicken going around. Then you'd have roasted potatoes. And you'd have something else and buns warming so that it showed the whole thing. And so that was my first job. And I have to tell you 2 stories I don't think you know. One was that I was inadvertently responsible for Steve Allen's Man on the Street interviews being created.
Oh, that? Yeah, I want to hear that.
Yeah, he was. Well, it's. Both of these stories are how inept I was. Well, not really me. The first one, me. The second one, Ernie Kovacs. but I would pick up food to go to the show, and we did one spot on Steve's show every Tuesday night. And there was a little grocery store near WOR radio television, which was right between Amsterdam and Columbus, and that's where Steve came out of. And so I was late, and I grabbed a bunch of stuff, and I grabbed a can of Brussels sprouts, not noticing that it was severely dented and had been stored next to a heating pipe. The preparatory area in the studio for me to put all my stuff together was next to the air conditioning intake. And it was a summer night. And when I opened the can of Brussels sprouts, they had disintegrated into a green fog that was sucked into the air conditioning.
Oh my God.
And created poison gas to the level people were screaming, and they had to move the show out on the street. So from then on, that was the beginning of Man on the Street.
Wow. Why is there no video of that? Boy, no kinescope of that anywhere?
No, they didn't know it was history, did they?
No.
Did they know it was you?
No,
they know
but
it
the
was
funny
you?
thing is, I worked, the first big job that I got was and when I say I at a certain point, it was with my partner, Sam Danoff, up to a point, and then we had a very amicable separation because I wanted to become a director. And at any rate, our first job was working for Steve Allen on his show in Hollywood, and that's what got us into. And we had this deal that that's the other picture that you want to show, the first picture that you want to show. And we had a deal that we had a 3-week guarantee for $500 each. We were working at WNW Radio for $75 each. And then it meant that we had to either give up those jobs and go out to California with a 3-week guarantee and no hope of anything after that if we didn't make it. My wife was pregnant, and I just said, we got to do this. The only time I'm ever going to get a chance. If I don't take it now. So at any rate, we had 3-week guarantee. Then we had another 3 weeks, then another 3 weeks. And after that, they would have picked us up for the season. Also, as a new time writer, coming out with us from California was Buck Henry. He was also on that staff. And so anyway, we went through the first 2 weeks, and we were okay, but nothing spectacular. And then in the third week, there was a show called Ben Casey. Back then, it was one of the first of the doctor shows with Vince Edwards, very brooding guy, and Sam Jaffe, who was the head of the hospital. Sam Jaffe was a very great Yiddish theater actor who incidentally played in a diaper. And anyway, he was Dr. Zorba, and he had hair out to there. And the show started by, he would have a blackboard and a pointer, and he would say, and there were these chalk figures on there. And he would say, this is the sign for man. This is the sign for woman. This is birth. This is death. And this is infinity. And then you go into Ben Casey. Well, when we did the sketch, Joey Foreman, who was a very great mimic, he played Dr. Zorba, and Steve was going to play Ben Casey. So the joke was, and this is a joke that I swear to God, if it hadn't been for this joke, I don't know that I'd be here now. And we did, can you show the thing as I'm doing it? Or I'll do it when I do the punchline to the whole thing. This is the sign for man. This is the sign for woman. This is birth. This is death. This is infinity. And this is a pussycat. And there was a little chalk figure. Can you show that on the screen? Because I did happen to have that picture sent to me. Anyway, Steve laughed for about an hour, and he picked us up for the whole season. And the show was canceled the next week, so they had to pay us $13,000. and that allowed me to stay in California. And not only that, but I was able to lend my friend Ernie Chambers, who had been brought out at the same time to do the Bob Newhart show, and he got fired. And so I loaned him $1,000. And Ernie was the producer of the Smothers Brothers, the original producer.
That's why I thought I knew that name. Yeah.
Ilson and Chambers. And so that all those careers were saved by that one joke.
By you, by that one joke. But you going back to WNEW, you got the Steve Allen thing because of Shapiro, George Shapiro, who you met in New York, right?
Yeah, George Shapiro, who probably is more well known than any other agent manager because he's Jerry Seinfeld's manager for 47 years. He discovered Andy Kaufman and actually played in the movie. What was the name of the movie that they did with Danny DeVito played George?
Man on the Moon.
Man on the Moon.
Oh, Man on the Moon.
George,
oh, yeah.
Yeah, George played a nightclub owner in that one. Anyway, Sam and I were working at WW Radio for $35 a week at that point. And I got a job at WNEW. It was the first job in the industry that I got before was right after Cousin Lester, but things were not great after Cousin Lester. And I was kind of lost, and I got a job. I saw it in the New York Times, $30 a week to be in the continuity department at WNW Radio. And I didn't know what a continuity department was, but I figured at $30 a week, I mean, it wasn't going to be brain surgery. So I went for an interview, and the guy who was going to hire me, he said, okay, I'm going out to lunch. I want you to write a commercial, a jingle, and a funny weather report. And he walked out the door, and I panicked. I didn't know how to do any of those things. And I didn't know how long his lunch was going to be. But when he came back, I had done it, and he gave me the job. And then he got a phone call from the guy he had lunch with, which was actually a job interview. So he got that job, and I became the head of the continuity department, all in the same 3 hours. And I still didn't know what it was. And it was still $30 a week. And that's when I had to hire an assistant for myself. And I met Sam then. Sam had been the bargain broadcaster at Klein's department store, which was a big bargains department store, huge. And Sam would go on and say, attention shoppers, there is a carload of pantaloons from China going on a special sale, being accompanied with a special fan from Iran. I mean, it went, and he did all that. One day, he said, attention shoppers, we just received a truckload of Maidenform bras, and this is going to be a bust-out sale. So they fired him, and I hired him. And so we started writing jokes. The continuity department meant you put the book together for the disc jockeys, do a commercial, do the weather, say hello to your mother, whatever the hell came next, play a record. And we started writing little jokes on the thing just because it was so boring. And the station, the head of the station said, well, keep doing that. That's working well. People like that. And so we did. And then our first Christmas there, we wrote a whole musical show about the station. And this little guy came up to us afterwards and he said, you guys are good and I'd like to be your agent. I said, oh my God, an agent? I never thought of an agent. I said, that's great. He said, yeah, my name is George Shapiro and I'm at the William Morris office. I said, well, can I have your card? He said, well, I don't have my cards yet because until today I was in the mailroom. So,
wow.
So the three of us, I mean, we were George's first clients and he fought for us and, and we just came up together, and he was the most wonderful guy in the world. and he used to say to people, the boys get $100 a minute, or not a word goes on paper. No one had ever heard of us. Some comic who was getting started said, "Well, how do I know they're any good?" He said, "Paid $100 and find out." Our best client,
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Yep.
our best client was a kid who was in high school who wanted to be a comedian, and it was Ron Carey,
Ah,
who was one of the dearest, funny. It's so funny. There, as you get older, if you're around, the hardest thing is to sit someplace and have people talk about something, because immediately you have a story that fits that situation, and you don't want to become obnoxious, but they're great stories. Ron Carey was this 16-year-old, 17-year-old kid, because he could drive, and he was so brilliantly funny. And he was scared, though. He lived in New Jersey, Italian family, and he was terrified to go anywhere that he couldn't hear WNEW on the radio, because that meant that that we were with him. And he got a job in Altoona or someplace, and it was through all kinds of mountains and stuff. And he got so scared because he couldn't hear. He turned back. He didn't show up.
Really? Well, in many ways, comedy hasn't changed much, Bill. It's the same. We've all gone through Altoona, but you guys were hired to write for other comedians, and you tell a story about Alan and Ross. I have a connection to them.
I always feel bad about this because everybody likes Marty Allen, and I don't have anything against him, but I never thought they were funny. And everybody at that point wanted to be the new Martin and Lewis, because that was the bellwether of what great comedy was. And no one ever made it, But Martin and Rossi came close. And we had written for a number of teams. And we wrote for a team. It started out, it was Chase and Martin. It was Martin and Chase. It was Martin and it was Chase, whatever. It went through 23 things. They kept finding new partners for Chase. And then we figured out Chase was the problem. It wasn't the other guy. So anyway, a guy, Mitchell, came along, and they were managed by Joe Scandori. And Joe Scandori was Don Rickles' manager. And he was the manager of a nightclub in Brooklyn called the Elegante, which was like the off-Broadway version of the Copa. And you'd go to the Copa on the weekend, but during the week, he would set up he would sell the nightclub out. You'd get dinner, you'd get a show, you'd get drinks, you'd get dancing, and he'd sell it out to groups. The only thing is, he'd sell it out to groups like CP would be next to the Ku Klux Klan. I mean, there were people that were not. It was not an audience; it was a mob. People said they all thought they had the whole place, and there were African Americans there, supremacists, and Joe had this guy go, and he was. In those days,
Bill, hold on a second. I think we're freezing up. Are you freezing up, Jimmy? Jim?
Yeah, I think it's just something.
I'm talking too long.
No, you're not talking about. No. You froze up. We don't want to miss anything. Yeah. So keep going.
Anyway, every nightclub in America had a Rocco. Except, you call a nightclub, you'd hear you'd say, "Is Rocco there?" And he'd say, "Just a minute," or "Speaking." At the Elegante, there was a third option. Is which one? It was the only nightclub in America that had two Roccos, so you didn't fool around there. And, oh God, there's just so many stories. But at any rate, Joe liked us and spread the word around. So we got to be introduced to other people. Like we wrote for Dick Shawn because of Joe. We did a piece for Dick Shawn. He wanted to do a musical version of Lolita because the movie had just come out. And we wrote him a 20-minute thing with songs and dancing and everything. And the first time he did it was at the the Dorado, and one is a fish and one is a hotel. Which is it? Dorado is a fish. He was at the Doral. Anyway, we went down there.
Oh, Doral is a hotel, right?
Yeah. It was one of the old hotels. Yeah. And we went down there and we left in a huge snowstorm on a Friday night, and we couldn't get back until the following Tuesday. We spent the weekend with Dick Shawn, Don Rickles, and Sophie Tucker.
Oh my God. Oh my God.
You can't invent the wonderful, bizarre things that happen to you. I mean, most of your audience doesn't know Sophie Tucker, but she was known as the last of the Hot Mamas, and she was a big, busty, lustful woman. By that time, she was in her late 70s, early 80s, and she was huge. And her big number in the show was Bang Bang Lulu from Bangor. And she had a white sequins cowboy suit, and she was big. I mean, it took many, many sequins, and she had 2 guns in the fire. And we sat and watched her for 4 nights, and then we'd go down and sit with Rickles, who was doing the lounge then. And Rickles back then was really really angry. I mean, he would do the same kind of stuff, but he meant it back then, you know.
Oh, really?
He was drinking. Yeah, he was drinking a lot. He was very heavy. And of course, Dick Shawn was a genius, you know.
Absolutely.
Anyway, through that is how we got to be introduced to Alan and Rossi. So we went to the Copa and we were ringside, and they did their show and people loved them. And I hated them. And when their performance was over, they came back, people slapping the women, kissing them. And, you know, they're opening their shirts and they're sweaty and they're going. And everyone is saying, whoa, brilliant. And I'm saying, what the hell am I going to say to these people? I have some integrity. So anyway, when they finally got there, Marty Allen said, huh? And I said, God, do you do 45 minutes? And he said, yeah, well, all I did was tell him how long they were on, and he took it as a compliment.
I love that. I never get tired of that. I was in preparation for this. Huh? I was watching them this afternoon in preparation for this, because I knew we were going to bring it up to you. You're right. They were not funny. They just weren't funny. I never got it either.
But Marty was loved and is still around.
Is he really? He's still alive.
I think, well, I don't know. I am, so I guess he is. And
well, you were touched by an angel, so you're going to be around forever.
God, I tell you, those days writing for comics.
I can't even imagine that.
Experience.
What did the day look like? What time did you start? Was it like a work day of 9 to 5?
We did it at night. We would work at WNEW during the day. Then we would go to have dinner at Horn and Hardhart's on 45th Street and 5th Avenue. There was a great Horn and Hardhart's, and it was so. Every story has a story. There were a group of 4 elderly women who got dressed up every night with hats, with pearls. They were probably in their 80s, and they made tablecloths. The waiters there would put napkins down for them to have a tablecloth, and they would have dinner together. And it was lovely, it was so dear, and we became friendly with them. And then one day, Sissy was not there, and Sissy had passed away, and they were having dinner in her memory. But every story has more story. It was so rich at those times, it just had everything had texture to it.
I
So
think
you would
about
go
the
there and you
era.
would.
Yeah.
What?
I think
What
I'm
were
about
you
the
sorry.
era
saying?
that you came up, and if you were if you were to pick one, if I were to pick one, that's the one I would have picked. The dawn of television and all
Yeah.
of the things you got to. You'll never see that again. So how did you get to Carl Reiner then?
Well, George, as it turns out, is Estelle Reiner's nephew.
No
And
kidding.
so, yeah. So he said to Carl, these guys are terrific and you should really see what they do. So your people are going to hate. You're going to start getting letters. Shut this guy up.
No,
Uh,
no, no, no! Don't you? No, 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 no,
we
no, no.
in those days, you would write a sample script if you wanted to try and get on a show. And well, the first show that we ever did was because on that Steve Allen show before it was canceled, Tim Conway and the Smothers Brothers. That's who was discovered on those shows. And through Tim Conway, it was very hard to break. If you had done variety, it was very hard to break into situation comedy. You had to prove yourself, but you couldn't prove yourself because no one would give you a job. So you had to write sample scripts. And Timmy got us a job on McHale's Navy, and we wrote a show called A Letter for Fuji. You remember McHale's Navy? They had this
Yeah,
Japanese prisoner who was their mascot, and he was lonesome, so they arranged for him to send a letter home by sneaking into a Japanese camp, and then they went there a little later to get the thing back. And so we wrote this script, and at the same time, we had written a sample script for Carl Reiner on the everybody in town. This was 1962. Van Dyke Show was on in 1960.
so it was
And
already a hit then. It was a hit then already by that
well, the
point.
first year they almost canceled it. Sheldon
Right.
Leonard convinced them to move it and give it a lead in with Green Acres and stuff. But every writer in town only wanted to write for the Van Dyke Show because if you did the Van Dyke Show, you were gold. You could do anything doing the Van Dyke Show. So through George, we wrote a sample script and he got it to Carl. The day that we had a meeting with this very sweet guy, Cy Rosen, who was the producer of McHale's Navy, and we went to Universal, and the script was 36 pages long, and he had a note on every line in the script. We went for lunch. There was a Chinese restaurant across the street, and Sam and we just said, well, obviously we got to find another line of work because we're only on page 12 and we've been there since 9:00 this morning. Then we got back and we get out at 4:00 in the afternoon. We went back to our office. Now, our office was at 8228 Sunset, the Bullwinkle building back in those days. There was a big statue of Bullwinkle in front. And we had an office
The Moose?
at the end.
The Moose?
Yeah, Bullwinkle. Yeah, they owned the building, their production company, and they rented out. Don't you remember Bullwinkle and Me?
Yeah, I do. I just never knew there was the Bullwinkle building.
Yeah, well, I mean, it was there where they had their offices, and there was a long corridor, and we had an office at the end of the corridor with not enough room for both of us to sit in. So Sam sat at the typewriter, and I sat in the hall. And up the corridor, 2 doors away, was Ellis Gold Enterprises. He was booking porn stars and stuff. And one day I was sitting in the hall, and this girl was on the phone. No cell phones then. She was on the phone. She said, Mom, I got this job with Ellis, and she said, well, yes, but only up to the nipple. In other words, are you going to have to show your tits? And she said, yeah, but only up.
I want to.
anyway,
I know. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry. I don't
go
mean to
ahead.
keep
No, ask
interrupting.
something. I'll have another thing to tell you.
I was
This is
curious about. I've always been
live.
curious about what your process with Sam was, and how you wrote.
He
Did you
typed and
pitch
I
jokes?
walked. Yeah, I'd say, hey, let's do this or let's do that anytime. And he said, well, what if we do? I said, okay, let's do. It was a real collaboration. It was a wonderful way to work. But the funniest thing about our office, which was so small, was over the desk there was a huge painting of Mount Fuji in Japan, which was okay, but there were shutters to the side of it so you could close it. It was like it was a window and we were looking at Mount Fuji. I couldn't even get in the office.
That's so funny.
Anyway, we get back to the office and we're just crushed. And we had written this sample script for Carl. And Sam gets a call. Because he's in the office and he starts to smile and smile. And I said, what? And we had left this other thing thinking we had to leave town. And Carl had read this sample script and he said he wants us to come in and work out a story. And he has a feeling that he's going to put us on the staff, which there wasn't. Carl was the staff, but he was going to give us an office and we could learn and go and write as many scripts as we could. And that was all in the same day, And
So what was the
incidentally,
first one? I'm sorry. Go
the
ahead.
first one was That's My Boy, about the wrong baby, which,
God.
and that was the result of the thing about the Van Dyke Show that made it so good. There was nothing that was done on that show that hadn't happened to somebody or hadn't almost happened to somebody. And when I had my first child, my wife, when we had our first child, I was living up in the hills and I timed the trip to the hospital at every possible time of the day just to make sure that I would get there in time. As it turned out, it started at 3 a.m. I went tearing down the mountain. I knew exactly where to go. And 2 blocks from the hospital, I stopped for gas.
Did you do the thing with the hat when you would get out of bed in the morning?
No, but almost. But I mean, I just wanted to be sure we had enough gas to get there. I didn't want to.
Oh, that's so great.
Anyway, when we were in the hospital, we got some wrong things, wrong lunch or the wrong whatever. And I actually said, how do you know you got the right baby? And back in those days, there was no DNA. And,
Right.
There were blood tests, but there was no definitive way to know if you were getting the right child. So when we came in to talk to Carl about a show, and I told him that story, he said, that's going to be it. And then we came to the point where the only solution, the only way to absolutely prove that it was their baby was to have the other couple be of a different ethnicity so that there was no question. And the choice was to have them, Asian probably. And Carl said, no, we're going to have it be a black couple. Now, this was 1963, and it was just the beginning of the civil rights movement. And, the network said there was no way you can do that because we know that things are changing, but you cannot have a white couple making fun of a black couple, making them the butt of a joke. And Carl said, no, you don't understand. It's the black couple that's making the white couple the butt of the joke. And the guy almost died and said, well, Jesus, you certainly can't do that. So Carl said, not only can we, but if we don't, I'm not going to do the show anymore. And you want to handle the publicity on that? So they said, okay.
Oh, go ahead. You want to tell them the whole story about the laugh? Oh, I just want to say, I like I told you before, I was 11 years old when that episode aired, and I remember watching it, and I never saw that coming. When Van Dyke opens that door, and I swear to God, I still didn't see it coming.
Nobody.
And I think I decided to be a comic at that point because of that.
Oh yeah.
It's exquisite.
Well, it's a classic moment. It's one of the top 10 listed funny moments, classic moment. And it's really because Carl had the courage to do it. As much as I was part of it, it was Carl Reiner who was the most extraordinary human being you would ever know. At any rate, it was a big gamble, and we had an audience, and there was like bleachers up there, and there were like 400 or 500 people, and that's where the laughs came from. And at the moment that the door opened, and Dick stood there with a little shocked look on his face, and then Greg Morris is the guy who came in, and he and Mitzi Kane, I think her name was, they came in, and there was a deadly silence. And I was standing next to Carl, and he said, "Oh shit." And then they started to laugh, and they laughed for 20 minutes. Every time we try to start again with them coming in the door, we'd get a little further, but then there'd be another line, and they'd laugh at that, and we'd have to go back again. So it took us 20 minutes to do the last 2 minutes of the show. And
you can see Greg Morris really enjoying that moment because he's laughing his ass off.
That was the thing, yeah, because it was the first time that African American and a Caucasian met eye to eye on an equal basis. That was what it was about. He was not a caddy,
fantastic.
He was not a waiter, he was another human being who had a baby.
Wow.
And people just bought it, and they realized not only that it was funny, but that it was a major moment in humanity in its own way. I mean, I'm not making more of it than it is. I'm just saying the kind of responses were, "Oh, isn't this about time?"
It was right around the time Kennedy was shot too, and Martin Luther King is coming. But the thing I love about that scene is once they get in the house, I don't know if it was Greg Morris or his wife that hands Mary Tyler Moore, "Here's your figs." I mean,
yeah,
that was the whole point coming over.
He was upset because they got his figs and we got their brownies or whatever it was.
Yeah, it was just the thing, they at one point Dick Van Dyke takes a footprint of the baby, and the kid's gonna
Jerry and he are gonna prove, and they take the footprint. He said, he says to Jerry, "What do you think?" And Jerry said, "What do I know about footprints?"
Yeah, I'm a dentist.
Jerry looked at the baby, and she said, "Why is his foot blue?" And he said,
Right.
"Jerry and I were conducting a series of tests." He
does it in that Jack Webb, kind of voice.
So wonderful. God, he would try to justify himself, and he'd become increasingly. And in that show, there's a moment that to me is my favorite line in the show, and it isn't even a joke. But I love the way he did it, and it was as he's about to open the door after Mary has been arguing, "You're crazy, you can't do this." And he stood it there, and she said, "Nobody is taking my baby." And he said, "Laura, I think it would be best if you went to your room."
Right. And that, the women's movement was just coming up. Yeah.
Huh?
The women's movement was just starting to blossom, and it was such a sexist comment. And it was it was so ahead of its time.
But she could also tell him to go to his room. That was the great thing about that show. He was as afraid of her as she was of him. He was scared to be a fool in her eyes. But Dick did things you couldn't. What you would often do with Dick Van Dyke is write a circumstance, and you'd write a joke or whatever, but within the framework of it, he would find something all on his own that was funnier than anything you could have conceived. You wouldn't conceive of that happening. I mean, there was a show we did where there was a nude painting of Mary that showed up.
October Eve, right?
Yeah,
Isn't it?
October Eve
Yeah.
with Carpenter the painter, which
Carpenter,
Carl played.
yeah.
And what it was is this painter painted people, and no matter what, he painted them naked. And so this picture of her showed up in a gallery, and Mary was so afraid, and everybody had seen it but Dick. And she finally in the kitchen, you remember that kitchen had a work
Right.
surface with a stove and everything. And she said, I have to tell you something. He was leaning over. She was on that side. He was on this side of the stove. And she said, there's a picture. And it just was so, the way, she played every second of it before it came out. And he says, and it's nude. You're nude? Well, I wasn't nude, but I am nude. And he said, so let me understand it. There is a painting that people can see with their eyes where you are naked. She said, yes. And she said, I'm so sorry. She said, honey, I'm here for you. And he's so convincing. And when she walks out of the room, he stands up and he's holding the grill tops from the burners. He had been so intense.
That's right.
And you couldn't write that. When he came up, that laugh was, it said everything about how upset he was. And he was just walking around. He didn't even
Look
know
on
he
his
had
face. The look on his face was just unbelievable.
All right, did I do something wrong?
Yeah, 1 second.
Hold on.
What happened? What happened?
Oh, I hit something in my fervor. As I said, he was walking around for about 2 minutes with these stovetops on his hands, not knowing he had them, and he just was. There was a show. You remember the show where Mary had her toe caught in the faucet at the hotel of their romantic night, and the door was locked, and he was going to break down the door. He was wearing a smoking jacket and an ascot, and he was Mr. Romance. And he ran to break down the door, and he hit it, and he hurt himself. And he said, I'll get it this time. And he ran, and in the air, he realized he hurt that shoulder, and in midair, he turned around and hit it with his other shoulder. You can't.
He spun like a ballerina, a ballet dancer.
Yeah,
he just spun, basically.
He was a dancer. And she learned everything from him. Another thing.
But she had funny bones, right? She had funny bones to begin
with. Absolutely. But Mary had to cry, and what? What did I do?
Nothing.
Oh, Mary had to cry a lot, and she didn't know how to funny cry. So Carl said to her, then don't cry. She said, well, it says to cry. And she said, yeah, but cry, but don't cry. So she then came up with what was the something, which she did, became her version of crying that was classic.